So today, we're going to do the second part of angles. And what you'll find on this sheet for today is the beginning of problems, this continuation of problems on the second page, but behind the first page are some notes. And this is what we're going to work on, but I'm going to give you some context first. Last class, this is day 8, by the way, classwork, homework 8. Last class, we talked about angles. And one angle is cool, but we want to talk about what happens with more than one angle. Well, if I have two angles and I'm told some specific information about them, I might be able to do something with them. There's 3 things I could be told about these angles. I could be told they're congruent. What does congruent mean? It means their measures are equal. So for example, if this is angle 1 and this is angle 2, I would then know that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2. Everyone good with that so far? If you're told they're congruent, then that would be true. But it's also possible that I could be told something else about these angles. I could be told that they are complementary. And what you'll see is on this page here, it talks about complementary angles being any 2 angles whose sum is 90 degrees. So an example for that might be where you're given a right angle and you're told that angle 1 and 2 together make up that right angle. Leo, this is notes. And so you know that the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 90. So again, if we were told they were complementary, we'd know that the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees. The third scenario is that we're told that these angles are supplementary. And as you see in the notes, it tells you that supplementary angles add up to 180. So if they add up to 180, we'd be looking at 2 scenarios. One scenario is that we've got angles that just add up to 180, like 180. Or turns out we can have something called a linear pair, where the 2 angles together make a straight line. Because how many degrees to go around in a complete circle? 360. So going halfway is 180. So if we knew that these 2 angles together added up to make a straight line, we could say that the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180. Now, what's the difference between these 2 scenarios? One where you're told these 2 angles are supplementary, and the second where you're shown that these 2 angles make a straight line. Well, the difference is where the angles are located. It turns out that we can describe whether 2 angles are next to each other, adjacent angles, based on whether they share a vertex and a side. Angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent angles. And that's just a descriptor. That just tells us what kind of angles they are. We know that they're flat in a plane. We know that they share a vertex. And we know they share a side. And in the event that they're adjacent angles, then we could use our angle addition postulate that we used last class, right? Measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 adds up to be this whole angle, whatever that is. If in fact it's the combination of supplementary and adjacent, what we're talking about is when I've got a straight line and then a point here that becomes the vertex. These 2 angles together, being adjacent, forming a straight line, tells us that angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair. And it turns out that if they're a linear pair, then supplementary, right? Because supplementary means they add up to 180. And therefore, if supplementary, that means that we can say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180. Okay. So again, what we're saying is that if we're told they're congruent, we have measure 1 equals measure 2. If we're told they're complementary, we know they add up to 90. If we told they're supplementary, that means they add up to 180. Now, let's take a look at an example of this. Here are two lines. They're crossing. And can somebody give me the measure that you think this angle is? Totally a guess. Looks like an acute angle. Turner, why don't you give me the angle measure here, please? Somewhere between 0 and 90 degrees. You make it up.
65.
65 degrees. Excellent. If I tell you this is 65 degrees, please be quiet. If I tell you this is 65 degrees, what do you know about this one in combination with this one? They make 180, right? Remember, this makes a straight line. These two form a linear pair. Therefore, I can find this one by saying it's 180 minus 65. It's 115 degrees. These two have to add up to 180. Now let's turn our paper a little bit. Is this also a straight line?
Yeah.
So what's true about this 115 and this angle over here?
60.
Yeah, don't these also add up to 180? So if I do 180 minus 115, I get 65. So this one's 65. And then could I look at this side?
Mhm.
Isn't this also 180? So if this is 65, how much is this one?
180.
115. So what we see here is that what's true about these two yellow angles I've colored? They're congruent. Nice use of the vocabulary word. What's true about these two pink angles? They're also congruent. So this is the last piece to our notes. Please be quiet. Vertical angles are two angles that are across from each other, like angle 1 and angle 2. And they're always congruent. Oops, that's not right. It's the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2. So here's what we're talking about. If I give you two angles and I tell you they're complementary, you know they add to 90. If I give you two angles and I tell you they're supplementary, then you know they add up to 180. If I show you a picture of angles in this relationship, you say they're a linear pair, then you know that they add up to 180. If I show you angles in this relationship, then you know that they're congruent. They're equal to each other. So let's take a look at these types of problems. Step 1. What's the relationship that these two angles have? What do you call it?
Vertical.
Vertical angles. Good. These are vertical angles. And if they're vertical, are they congruent, supplementary, or complementary? Congruent. Therefore, these are the same. So x equals 112. Done. What about number 2?
Complementary.
Good. These are complementary. Which means they add to what? So then I'm going to write that they add to 90. I'm going to say x plus 68 equals 90. Subtract 68. X is 22. What about number 3? They're a linear pair. Good, which means supplementary, which means 180. So I'd say 124 plus x equals 180. That means x equals 56. Four and 5 are going to ask you to be a little bit more independent and focus on several things at once. Okay, so what do you think about x? How would you find x? Good, because x plus 43 will equal 180. How do you know? Because they make a linear pair. What about y? It is the same as 43 because it's vertical angles, right? What about z? Same as x. Or you could say z plus 43 makes 180. Okay, so how's that going to change when we move down here to like number 10? Well, they give us information about PQT. Where's that? PQT, this one. And then they give us information about SQR. Where's SQR? On the bottom. And so you ask yourself, what's the relationship between those two? Those are vertical. If they're vertical, that means what? Congruent, right? So we know that these two angles are the same. So then we substitute. 3x plus 47 equals 6x minus 25. Subtract 3x. Add 25. Oops. Divide by 3. Oh, but it doesn't just ask for x, it asks for SQR. And the measure of angle SQR is 6x minus 25. But now I know what x is. 24. 120, 144 minus 25 is 119. I think that should give you everything you need to solve these ones and finish this homework. This is your homework to finish and submit these 3 pages for Tuesday or Wednesday of next week.